Have you ever realized that your childhood might be the last one in human history that existed mostly offline? No location tracking, no constant notifications, no digital record of every mistake you made growing up. If you were born between the late 1970s and early 1980s, you belong to a small bridge generation often called Xennials. You learned to rewind cassette tapes with a pencil, and later built your first email address. You remember a world before the internet, but you also helped build the world after it. And that strange position, living between two completely different eras, did something unusual to your psychology, your parenting style, and even your worldview. Because Xennials are not just another generation. They are the transition itself, the last offline childhood. For most of human history, childhood happened in relative privacy. Not secrecy, but invisibility. A scraped knee on the playground stayed on the playground. An awkward teenage moment lived only in memory. But Xennials grew up at the very end of that era. You might remember something researchers now call unstructured childhood time. Hours with no schedule, no screens, no algorithm feeding entertainment every few seconds. And something interesting happened during those quiet moments. The brain began to wander. Modern neuroscience calls this the default mode network, the system that activates when the mind is not focused on a specific task. It is the same network involved in imagination, self-reflection, and creative thinking. For children today, that state is becoming increasingly rare. But for Xennials, it was normal. Boredom was not a problem to solve. It was simply part of being alive. And learning to sit with boredom quietly builds something important. Patience, curiosity, and the ability to create meaning without constant stimulation. Growing up during a technological earthquake. But just as Xennials were entering adolescence, something extraordinary happened. The world changed faster than almost any generation before them had experienced. In the span of roughly 10 years, the internet appeared in homes. Email replaced letters. Search engines replaced libraries. And eventually, smartphones replaced silence. Most generations experience technological change gradually, but Xennials experienced something closer to a technological earthquake. They remember dial-up internet, that strange robotic sound of a 56K modem connecting. Logging onto the internet was not automatic. It was an action. You went online and later logged off. That boundary created an unusual psychological habit. Xennials learned to live in two worlds, a physical one and a digital one. And for a long time, those worlds were clearly separated. But as adulthood unfolded, that boundary slowly disappeared. Today, the internet is no longer a place we visit. It is the environment we live inside. Why Xennials developed cynical optimism. Another defining trait of Xennials is something psychologists sometimes describe as cynical optimism. At first glance, it sounds contradictory, but it reflects the historical timeline they lived through. Many Xennials were children during the relatively stable 1990s. It was a decade filled with confidence about the future. Technology was supposed to improve life. Education was supposed to guarantee opportunity. The global narrative was simple. Progress was inevitable. But just as Xennials entered adulthood, reality became more complicated. Economic disruptions reshaped career paths. Global events shattered the idea that the world was predictable. And the rapid acceleration of technology created both opportunity and uncertainty. So Xennials learned something unique. They still believe effort matters. They still hope the future can improve. But they also understand something else. Systems fail. Plans collapse. And the future rarely unfolds exactly the way it was promised. So their optimism became cautious. Not naive, but resilient. Parenting across two worlds. Nowhere is this generational perspective more visible than in parenting. Because Xennials are raising children in an environment completely different from the one they grew up in. Their childhood was mostly private. Their children's childhood is often partially public. Photos are shared instantly. Memories are archived automatically. Friendships extend beyond physical spaces into digital networks. This creates a parenting challenge that previous generations never faced. Xennial parents must constantly answer questions their own parents never had to consider. When should a child have a smartphone? How much online exposure is healthy? How do you teach digital responsibility to someone who has never known a world without screens? The goal is not to eliminate technology. That would isolate children from their own generation. But full immersion carries its own risks. So parenting becomes a balancing act, encouraging digital literacy, while still protecting something essential: offline life. The hidden cost: generational invisibility. Despite their unique experience, Xennials often occupy an unusual cultural position. They are frequently overlooked in generational discussions. The focus tends to fall on larger groups, older generations who built institutions, and younger generations who grew up entirely inside digital culture. But Xennials sit in the middle, translating between both worlds. At work, they often explain technology to older colleagues. At the same time, they help younger coworkers understand systems that existed before everything moved online. In families, they often support aging parents while raising children at the same time. Sociologists sometimes describe this as the bridge generation. Bridges rarely attract attention, but without them, movement between two places becomes impossible. And in many ways, Xennials perform that same role in society, quietly connecting two different eras. Why this generation matters. In a world moving toward constant connectivity, the experiences of Xennials carry something valuable: memory. Not nostalgia for the past, but lived evidence that human attention once worked differently, that people once spent long periods unreachable, that friendships deepened without documentation, that identity formed slowly, outside the pressure of permanent observation. Those memories matter, because the future of technology will require people who understand its benefits, but also recognize its limits. People who know that progress is not just about speed. Sometimes it is about protecting spaces where life can remain slower, quieter, and more human. So if you belong to this small bridge generation, your experience is more important than it might appear. You remember the world before constant connection. You adapted to the world after it. And that perspective may be one of the most valuable tools we have for navigating what comes next. Because every new era needs people who remember the one that came before it. Not to return to the past, but to make sure the future still leaves room for being human. Thanks for watching. Hit the like button, share with your friends, and drop a comment below. See you in the next video.